I've been teaching now for 30 years. I started off in my early 20s. I had no experience, but after teaching for 5 years, I discovered that I liked it, so I returned and got my master's degree from Oklahoma State University in teaching English as a second language. And from there, I've been teaching at a variety of programs in a variety of countries, and also around the United States. So, and now I'm here at the ELI. My teaching philosophy, well, I rely a lot on my students. I spend the first couple of days, the first week, finding out what the student knows and how I can best utilize that information, because something that I've learned from the very first period of time that I taught, that my students are intelligent, my students have information, and I've learned to tap into that information. So I go into it with trust that my students will try their best. They're not trying to scam the class. They're not trying to cheat on every test. I know there is a problem with that, but I don't go into any classroom with that. And I try to establish a rapport with my students. And so, because the relationship is really important, I want to be able to treat the students as like a colleague. I mean, yes, there is a difference, teacher-student, but as what we've talked about in our class, the students also become the teacher. I want to be able to learn from my students in the same way my students learn from me. So it's not a one-way street. It goes both ways. And this is probably one reason why I have been teaching for so long. I haven't gotten bored. It's always a new experience, new students, new classes, or even the same class. I can teach the same class session after session, and I can have a completely different teaching experience. Because I come from an unorthodox viewpoint, and what I mean by that is once again, I do have trust in my own knowledge as a teacher. I do have that experience. A lot of the teachers here, they're all experienced teachers, but we come with different backgrounds and different expectations. For me, I came from not having any textbooks, and so I was always looking for ways to create my own material for the classes, which is why I could individualize the classes for the students. So when I taught at Penn State, I was there for about 11 years. I was encouraged to use sources like NPR and PBS, and I was able to create meaningful lessons and that hit all of the learning objectives. And that's what we have here. However, when Penn State became accredited, they wanted to narrow it down to using textbooks.
Yes.
And for me, that has been a struggle. I use the textbooks, but I try to tell my students that textbooks should be considered reference texts, not just textbooks, but something that they can use throughout their entire learning experience. But what makes me special?
Certificates, the results of your students.
It's again, I don't necessarily adhere to the printed page, because language changes. And that's something, and I want my students to go out and discover and explore and even prove me wrong. I mean, I could be wrong, and I have been wrong, but go out and fact check. Become the explorer. You become the teacher. And it was a pleasure teaching you guys, because you were teachers and you did challenge, and you raised the bar of the class in many ways because of that.
Thank you.
once again, drawing on the student's strengths. But again, what I have to do is I have to find ways, where are my student strengths, and then tapping in that. But using authentic material, being real, and using material that are not necessarily designed for ESL students. I want students, particularly at the advanced level, to be listening and reading material that native speakers of English would be reading, because this is what they're going to be facing in the real world.
Yes.
Now, this is for advanced level students. For lower level students, there needs to be more structure. But even for the low level students, I was still able to use NPR. Now, I was using it in a different way than teaching an advanced level class, but I was still able to expose the students to real language. And that's really what they need. It's not always step by step. Language is messy, and you have to be able to decipher what's what, look for the key words, and try to get your own understanding of it, and then recast it yourself. You know, talk to a native speaker, talk to a tutor, talk with your talk with your teacher. Is this what this means? So that you get an understanding of it. So finding and establishing that rapport, and also trying to get so that the class works together. I don't know if you remember, I don't know if I've actually told you this, but in many ways, yes, I am a teacher, but I also can consider myself an artist. I mean, we're all artists in a way, but my classroom becomes my canvas. So we create a classroom, and it is very organic. It changes. So even though I might be teaching the same material, I will approach it in a different way based on the students. So being able to understand who my students are, being able to know their strengths and weaknesses, and also knowing how the class works well together. Just last session, I did have a class that did gel very well together, and you know, there seemed to be, even though there was one student who did stick out and did not always play ball, if you will, he was able to do, follow material, but you also have to understand that there are differences, and I do approach the language teaching a little bit differently, and a lot of times students at the beginning of class, they're a little bit confused because they're used to being given the information. I want them to explore the information. I want them to discover by themselves and ask the questions, because that's what's going to help them become a lifelong learner, because we're all lifelong learners.
Independent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I have discovered, and I've seen myself in a variety of different programs, and I've noticed that in a lot of ways I'm very similar. I'm a little bit more mature. I have developed from even when I first started up until now. My teaching style has relatively been consistent, but that opens up the possibility of challenging myself and doing different things. And this is what I like about using sources like NPR. I know I'm repeating myself, but even the New York Times, the Atlantic Monthly, finding articles that are up to date, and how can I apply this material to the classrooms, using new media, social media. I still haven't mastered the cell phone within the classroom. I'm pretty old school about that. Do not use your cell phones, except for certain purposes. But overall, because I want the students to be using the language, I want them to be thinking in English. So trying to adapt what I have, developing new ideas, coming up with different ways of assessing students' abilities to take exams. Trying to think, what do I do to improve? I listen to other instructors, but I primarily try to fit what I can, trying to push my students. But again, I want us to find a pathway for the class. I don't necessarily want to dictate it. I will guide it, but in a lot of ways it's also the student's responsibility. I don't know if that really answered your question or not.
No, it's okay.
I'm looking forward to teaching them. I had a positive experience 2 sessions ago, and I hope to continue. And I'm hearing a lot of good things from other instructors. So. Well, for advice for ELI students is it never stop. It's not, you're a lifelong learner. This is not just about the grade. And I try to tell my students that, okay, grades are important, yes, yes, yes. But what is important is your language development, and it's your learning, and it's your approach. Find out what works for you. Don't give up. It's gonna be hard. It only gets harder. I've heard so many say, oh, if I pass this, it'll be easier. No. If you pass it, you're gonna be challenging yourself to the next level. And it's gonna be harder. Every step of life is like that. You start with a child, you are given everything. The older you get, the more you have to earn it. So it's about earning the knowledge, learning it by yourself and taking the steps, and it's not gonna be given to you. You have to find ways of earning it yourself. And the one piece of advice, or something that I always tell my students, even at the beginning of every session, my job is to teach language, is to assess and evaluate. It's your job to demonstrate to me that you're ready for the next level. It's the student's ability, and it's the student's responsibility. It's their job to demonstrate to their teacher that they are ready. And then they can go forth. Teachers, especially beginners, be open. Be open to your students. When I first started learning or teaching, I did not consider myself a teacher, but I wasn't teaching the information, but rather I was presenting the information. I was a native speaker, and that's why I was hired. I did not have the language instruction or the language background or the knowledge, but now I do. But I have never forgotten that I am actually presenting the language to the students, and it's up to them to understand it. Now I have a better understanding of the different learning processes and the different rules and even the prescriptive and the prescribed ways of teaching, but I still want the students to understand from their own viewpoint, not necessarily. And I want them to describe the language, because that's how they're going to understand it, coming in front of from both prescriptive and descriptive viewpoints. Be open. Be open. I mean, continue, never stop, explore, and also remember, and this is something that I have to remember, that you are also a student. And when I take classes, I am a student, and it's hard to sort of break that, but we're all teachers and we're all students. My students are teachers, and I am a student, and so we're all learners. And I was very happy to have had the experience to interact with all the Khibrat teachers, and I've had a very positive experience on different levels. So just keep going, keep being yourself, and never give up. Oh, it was very nice being able to talk with you.
Okay, thank you.